I'd like to welcome everybody to the Rules Committee meeting. Go through and identify ourselves for the record. Please have the record running so we can verify if it's there. Okay. We'll start with you, sir.
Sergeant Roy LeBlanc, I'm the traffic sergeant at APD.
Chief Talley, APD.
Bill Policy, Municipal Attorney.
Patrick Flynn.
Ellie Green. Dick Grant.
Jim Steele.
Bill Evans.
Pete Peterson. World Dunbar.
Eric Croft.
Rosella Young.
Good, sir. Jerry George.
Joan Priestley. Debbie Kelly, ADM. Stephanie Mormello, Municipal Traffic Engineer.
John Francis, Chief Traffic.
Lisa Slitzner, Deputy Municipal Clerk.
What we're going to do is first go through the ordinance, and then when we're done, we'll ask some members if they've got questions, then we'll go to the public for any testimony. Okay? So we've got in front of us 2016-162, and basically this is going to take 8 votes to send to the public. It only takes 50% plus 1 vote to prove it, but it takes 8 votes to send it as a charter change. This came because of 1997, we had a problem with the parking authority. I think we all remember that time here at the public authority, what was happening. They put this into effect that only a sworn police officer can give a ticket. You can't use automobile equipment. So what this does is just sends to the voters, we get 8 votes, and lets them make that decision. This doesn't lay out the whole process for how we would do red lights in Anchorage. That would be for another day, another time. But this is just to even get permission to take 2 taxpayers' dollars to create this. I do have a copy of what Chicago's done. I've given them that to some members because they're a good example on starting from ground zero and what they've done red light road. So we can go through that. So anyway, going through this ordinance, I had Department of Law drafted for us. I appreciate that. Talks about the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Talks about physically paced red lights. Seems to reduce the amount of traffic accidents. Goes over the 97 change to the charter. And then on the back, it just gives us the language that will be in the ballot proposition if in fact we get the 8 votes. Because it's a high test for 8 votes on the line. Now, I was asked, I think when Eric came on this thing, I said, there's things you don't touch, Eric. Cat lights, the thing, fluoride, red lights. Yeah. So I invited him when I told you I drove
Taxis, you mentioned taxis.
I did. So who knows what's going to happen? I think Tuesday we're going to have Florida.
I was going to introduce a cat ordinance.
Oh, that was Mark Vegas. He introduced the licensing for cats. If you ever want to really kill yourself. 3 nights of testimony, we had people coming in with their cats. What if he doesn't go to my neighbor's yard?
I'm drafting that.
Yeah, I love cats.
And I'm going to sign it with you.
It's already drafted. We'll find it for you, and you can do it.
So,
Any questions on the document Department of Law drafted for it? Yes, for it.
are we going to have some testimony first? Or do we want to?
Let's ask the chief. Chief, you got anything to say about this?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
We were not asked to have a presentation
I know.
available, but anything that helps law enforcement to make the community safer and help with the drivers and so on, we welcome that. And the studies are still out as far as red lights and so on, and we have some information to share with you on that. But you know, these have other benefits also, such as we're experiencing quite a few stolen cars here in Anchorage as well as in the state of Alaska, not just our department, but departments throughout the state of Alaska report stolen cars. And if some of these vehicles can be identified and put in places, that would have a residual effect on helping with that and so on. So we're welcome anything that can aid in reducing these crimes.
Mr. Falls, your department drafted this for us. Any comments?
No, I'm happy to answer questions. I will mention that as the presentation that you mentioned correctly noted, that the charter amendments that enacted Article 21 were largely a reaction to photo radar. As applied to the traffic safety cameras, they caused 2 problems which would have to be reversed in this charter amendment. One was that they said traffic enforcement could only be made by sworn officers of APD themselves, and second, that it has to be traffic enforcement in person. So there's actually nothing that prohibits today APD from parking an officer directly under a traffic safety camera at a red light intersection. That's, of course, obviously not very practical.
We have 412 officers. Now, how many red lights do we have in Anchorage?
More than that, I would assume.
The traffic engineer.
Probably know exactly how many.
Approximately 300 signalized intersections in the municipality of Anchorage.
Oh, less than that, I take it back. So, the draft as presented here would address those two items. First, it would say that traffic signals could be enforced through a third-party vendor, and second, that the enforcement didn't need to happen in person.
Mr. Flynn, sir, first.
Yeah, a couple questions, and I don't know if best for the APD to answer this or traffic engineering, but my understanding is we do have some cameras in place at some locations that are used, for example, for accident investigation and that sort of thing. Can you describe what level of, say, penetration you already have into this field?
Well, for one thing, most of our vehicles are now equipped with in-car video, and that proves to be very, very beneficial. And when all this took place, we did not have in-car video, and technology and all that has really evolved greatly. There are various locations around the city for any given reason, be it private industry or other reasons, that there are cameras that capture events that we sometimes are able to use and so on. But there is not a sophisticated surveillance system in place.
So,
Can I add to that?
yeah, please.
John? We do have some cameras at various signalized intersection locations to help as far as monitoring traffic situations, adjusting signal timing, especially as it comes to construction in different areas, monitoring areas that we may have increased safety risk. We have one right now out monitoring Burgaw next to Fire Station 3. We have them in various locations, and yes, at times, if APD knows that we have a camera at an intersection and there was some sort of crime or crash or something that occurred, and they think that we might have our camera pointed in the right direction, they will contact us and we're able to clip the footage to be able to do it. But these cameras are not being used for active enforcement per se.
Oh, I'm aware of that. I'm just curious about, I mean, roughly how many do we have? 20. We have one that we just rotate?
20.
20, sorry. And are they generally always in the same place, or do we move some of them around? They're fixed. They're fixed.
Anything else, Mr. Flynn, sir?
I guess I did something Mr. Falsey said that piqued my interest. The third-party vendor, did you say, for enforcement?
Through the chair, yes. So my understanding is that the way these traffic red lights are typically used in other jurisdictions is that rather than dedicating sworn personnel to review the footage and mechanically issue the citations, it's often contracted out to another source. There's nothing that would require that to happen here, but there would be an authorization to say that you don't have to put a sworn officer reviewing the footage and mechanically issuing the citations. That can be done by non-sworn personnel, other municipal employees, or, as I stated, through a vendor that would mechanically look to see if the car was under the light when it was red.
Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, just a comment for you, Mr. Chairman. As the author of the previous charter amendment that affected Section 21, I think you might want to consider altering this document to specify that the enforcement would remain a municipal function. Perhaps not necessarily a sworn officer, but I think we gained some traction with the body politic by insisting that it remain in-house and therefore under a little more, shall we say, oversight.
Local control. Right. Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
You could take that under advisement, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a question for Bill, I think, primarily, and it's a little beyond perhaps the narrow focus of this ordinance, but it goes to the heart of switching from, moving violations issued by an actual officer to camera enforcement. And maybe you haven't gotten to this point yet, but a car is going to be going through a red light. The owner of the vehicle will be issued the citation, is my understanding. What is going to be the burden or who's going to have the burden of proof if the owner of the vehicle says he or she wasn't driving the vehicle at the time?
Yeah, through the chair, there's a level of implementation details that we haven't looked at closely and probably wouldn't in the absence of this not existing in the charter. But I'm sure there would have to be a mechanism to make that case, to make some showing that in fact your car has been stolen, you're not driving it at the time, or you've lent it to a friend. I'm sure there are models to borrow from other jurisdictions, but yeah, assess that carefully.
And then the straight follow-up. Yeah, and I understand that's more into implementation, but it's also, I mean, I wouldn't support the switch or even authorizing a switch unless I was already assured of how that was going to work, because it will happen from time to time. People loan their cars out, their kids drive the cars, friends drive the cars. I think we have to have that nailed down as how that's going to work and who's going to bear that burden before we authorize the switch.
Thank you. Mr. Wilton, sir?
He's got a list of questions, but maybe they're not relevant. So all this does is change the charter so that then we could later on look
That's all
at
this
the
does.
broader mechanism.
Because we can't even spend dollars now. I'm not comfortable spending money now to explore them until we get permission from the citizens to look at this. All this does is, if it passes, allows us to take a look down this avenue.
And were we to, if this passes, then what process does it take to institutions? Does Assembly have any role, or does APD just walk this mountain?
Somebody has a role, will come back to us to be approved by ordinance, much as they did in Chicago. Will come back to us.
With all these details on who gets the ticket, who
Yes,
looks
all
at
that.
Mr.
If you look at
Welton,
what I gave you, Chicago worked all that out, we didn't have to.
Mr. Welton, as I referenced earlier, we amended section 21 to allow for non-sworn officers, non-sworn personnel to enforce parking in the downtown cores, defined geographically, and required it to be a municipal agency. We subsequently passed an ordinance that authorized Easy Park or whatever they are, ACDA, to do that enforcement and describe specifically how they would do their mission.
Okay, well, I'll save these questions for that time.
I know in Chicago, for example, they view it the same thing as a parking ticket. They deal with it that way. Every jurisdiction is somewhat different.
Sure, insurance company doesn't consider it a parking ticket.
Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You may have a couple of questions here. So the cameras that we have now, would the red light cameras be the same as the same type of camera?
I don't think so.
The cameras we have now have very low resolution.
Low resolution.
Okay.
And does anyone have any idea what the cost of these cameras are and how many intersections we might be planning to cover with them?
I don't. I know when I looked at Chicago, they started out with 2 intersections to see how it worked for them. And their process is they've got a committee that comes together, police department decide where the red lights go, and they notify the public ahead of time. When they either put them in there or they pull them out. So every town has to figure out what they're comfortable with. And I appreciate Mr. Flynn because he is correct. I want to make sure we have local control on this. We don't want an outside agency making money on the citizen paying. Is that all, Mr. Peterson?
That's great, thanks.
Mr. Dunbar? And then
Mr. Cox was for you.
Yeah,
He's the list.
Okay. All
I'm just
right.
working my way down.
Okay, so I had a couple of questions as well, but I think we've already sort of touched on it, but there's a lot of things I would need to see in an ordinance before I was comfortable with this being implemented. And so I guess I'm curious kind of, and from Mr. Falsey, your sort of legal position, if this were to pass, could the administration then go implement this? Or does it require some kind of, effectuating ordinance to get it going forward?
Through the chair, I don't believe there would be any need for an effectuating ordinance.
So that's what sort of worries me. There's a lot of things that need to change here, and we're seeing it kind of late. And I want to ask this question, but at the same time, there's a bunch of other subsidiary questions that we haven't been able to talk to. And if they approve this, then the administration can go forward, and I guess we'd have to come up with an ordinance to try to stop them. But I would rather it be reversed, that we have an ordinance either already in place or that was somehow tied to this Maybe we can think of a legal way to do that, to alter this language, where this wouldn't go into effect until we had some kind of actualized ordinance. My other question, my other ones are comments, I'll save them for later.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, I guess to Mr. Falsey, I understand all the history and appreciate where Mr. Train's coming from to try and prevent this. And I also understand how short we are of sworn officers in trying to fix that. But I'm worried we're buying a whole bunch of trouble for not much benefit. That is, right now, I served for 2 years as a municipal prosecutor. If I bring in a video, they did bring in videos of here is Joe stealing my bike and here is Jane kicking my dog or whatever, that a sworn officer can look at that video and write out a citation or an arrest warrant, or it is evidence. And so, I mean, what got, I think, the public so mad was its automatic and non-sworn nature. But if you install 30 high-resolution cameras in the most busy intersections, and then it seems Chief just had a prosecutor and a sworn officer, or just a prosecutor, Friday from 2 to 6, look at those, and to Mr. Whittleton's point, say, here's a red light running, I have photographic evidence of a red light running with the license plate, and I can pull up the driver's license of the person who owns that car, and it looks like them. We could do just a series of these that fit the current charter, that meet the objections that people had in the past, and it would seem to me at relatively low sworn officer time. So all that is to say, Mr. Palsy, couldn't we do that now? Couldn't I have a sworn officer look at video accumulated over a week and write citations based on that evidence?
Through the chair, I think the answer to that is likely no, because the charter, as amended now by 2104C, now says any and all vehicle law and code enforcement activity shall be performed in person. So I believe we have understood that to mean that if you are citing for a failure to stop the stop sign or going through a red light or speeding, the officer has to have been on the scene witnessing that. If you wanted to make a run at saying it has to stay in-house at APD, and if after the fact an APD officer can review the video and then issue a citation, I think you could probably even get there just by deleting automated, references to the word automated, and taking out section 2101, so that it would now say, except the only change would then be, except for the use of traffic safety cameras for failure to stop at a red light signalized intersection, everything has to be in person. And then presumably you could have someone whose day job consisted of watching hundreds of photos of people being under red lights and then issuing those photo citations.
So C, you read vehicle modifies both law or code enforcement, or is code enforcement standalone? That is, you can enforce the criminal law through a picture, but you can't enforce the traffic law through a picture.
That's my understanding. The penal code is Title 8. The traffic code, the vehicle code is Title 9. And my understanding of the way we have interpreted this is that Title 9 enforcement happens in person, even if the criminal code does not require you to be on scene.
Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson and Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was surprised at Mr. Claus's comments that if this is approved by the voters, that the administration could implement it, because I thought that wasn't the case at all. Okay, but in my opinion, the way we can fix that is that a section to this charter amendment that says approval of this charter amendment will allow the assembly to explore automated traffic safety cameras with implementation approved by ordinance only, which would allow a whole nother, an additional public process. So if this gets approved, we still would have to go to developing an ordinance, having work sessions, move committee meetings, and then having a public hearing before anything happens. So anyway, that's my thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steele, sir.
Yeah, just as a point of information, the emails I'm getting are positive for the ordinance. However, in community councils, there have been a few people that quickly responded, we don't want the cameras to red light. And to point out that I shot that down. But then people would come to me and say, it's really necessary. I see it. As a matter of fact, I have one individual in my district who came to me and showed the scars where he had actually been hit, T-boned by red light one. And I know that it's happened a number of times in the city. And it's a safety measure that I think we need to find a way to reduce it, certainly. And I think just by having it out there and people knowing that that's a possibility, we're going to slow people down. And it's worse now when you have ice on the road and so on and so forth, and that there's a lot of people speeding and not able to stop at stop signs or lights. And I think we need something, and I think there is support out there, community support out there for this type of method of reducing that risk that they will face when
Since we have the chief here, all the books that I've seen so far of the various communities that have implemented the red light camera system, a lot of them use third-party vendors and such, but it seems like the statistics was that it does reduce T-bone accidents due to red light, but rapidly, dramatically increases rear-end accidents. Do you guys know about that, or do you have any concern about that?
So through the chair, Mr. Evans, there are quite a few studies out there that it says it does reduce incidents, and that is the ultimate goal behind this, is to correct behavior and to make this roadway safer. But for every one of those studies that says it does correct behavior, there's also studies out there that quite candidly say that it is not effective. Just fundamentally, the way these systems normally work is it's a camera system that measures timing and the cycling of the red light and where that vehicle is in relation to the light when it's red. Is it in the middle of the intersection? Is it across the lines? Things like that. And then a citation is issued to the registered owner. The registered owner doesn't get any points normally. They are fined, and the registered owner is responsible for seeing that Somerville parking ticket that is paid. Now, they could come to court and contest it, saying it was unauthorized use of their vehicle, had they reported their vehicle stolen, things like that. But these are all considerations on how you'd actually set your system up.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that answer, because I didn't really understand it that way. So these citations would not technically be moving violations. There's some other form of...
In most jurisdictions,
they wouldn't have
vast
to be
majority
moving
you
violations.
do not get points for it. It's just a fine, and again, is to correct the behavior at intersections.
That's a good clarification. And just to follow up on my original question, though, are you concerned about, or have you seen some of the studies that indicate that one of the customary or problematic effects of these cameras is to increase rear-end collisions, where people are all of a sudden now so hyper vigilant that they're slamming on the brakes more often? And I think that'd be...
And that's what I was alluding to. Some of the studies say it actually increases collisions, and because people anticipating and stopping prematurely and things like that, and causing additional accidents. It's just conflicting studies. Now, I can share with you that DOT, the state DOT, is currently conducting a study of red light intersections and so on, but those results probably won't be out for this summer.
Thanks.
Mr. Folsey, sir.
As a follow-up on my folks that spike it over to our traffic engineer, I think that is a real phenomenon, but one that can be designed for.
Yes, it is a phenomenon in certain locations that really rear-end crashes can increase because people are now trying to stop to avoid the fine. However, when you're looking at severity of crashes, typically your angle crashes, your T-bone crashes are going to be your higher severity, so you're talking major injuries and fatalities are the greater potential for those, whereas rear ends are generally lower severity. Not always the case. If somebody stopped at an intersection, somebody gets them going 50 miles an hour, you still have all of the physics contending with you. But generally, so there have been studies that show really overall the number of crashes may end up being a wash when you look at the intersection, but generally the severity of those crashes decrease overall. So,
Other questions for Senator? Mr. Dunbar, sorry, sir.
So I guess I have two. One for you, Stephanie. Is there any data about how this impacts pedestrians? And, you know, if not, that's fine. And the second is, going off what Ms. Gray Jackson said, which I really appreciated, but it's a question for you, Mr. Balsey. Are we able to draft an amendment kind of as she was describing, and then what's the process for that? We're hearing this on Tuesday, I believe, so are we talking about an S version, or are we talking about a floor amendment? What's the plan?
Funding, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, ma'am.
4 amendments would be very simple.
Okay. All right. Well, I would be very supportive of that. I want to make sure that this doesn't go forward without an understanding that there's going to be a follow-on ordinance that the administration is prevented from going forward until we have a detailed ordinance for implementation. Because there are other things here too, like I think we're going to have to drop the fee, for example. If we're going to give out a bunch more of these tickets, then the fee has to be significantly less than it is now. But I'm sorry, Stephanie, is there any information on pedestrians or bicyclists, for example?
nothing that I've seen specifically related to the safety, like documenting those measures specifically. Generally, pedestrians and bicyclists are more aware of their surroundings, just in the sense that they can hear. They're not enclosed. I mean, when you're in your vehicle, even if you don't have your radio on, you're kind of buffered, and you may not hear if somebody's skidding. And if you have the half the people that have the radios turned up, there's that conflict of maybe not being aware or having the visibility. Pedestrians, generally, if they don't have their headphones, they can hear and do not enter the intersection with somebody going full speed through an intersection running a red light. Now, when somebody's rolling through a right turn, that's a different conversation.
Right. Just the last comment on that. Yeah, just the last comment on that. I do believe the underlying premise of this, that we have sort of an epidemic of red light runners in Anchorage. And I think that to go to Ms. Mormello's point on the severity of the crashes, we probably will see some more, rear ends. But if we can avoid, we had a man killed trying to walk across the street by a red light runner on those lights this summer. And I know that anecdotes shouldn't drive law, but it certainly is the case that for a pedestrian, a bicyclist, or a person on foot, a red light runner, those consequences are much more severe than a rear end. So if we could alter behavior to reduce that epidemic, I'm very much in favor of it.
To Mr. Trainee, to finish answering
Go ahead,
Mr.
Chief.
Question, Sergeant Blunt would just add something which may be beneficial.
So currently under municipal code, we have an ordinance referring to school bus stop requirements. And it'd be very similar to what you would need to enact in order to do a red light program. And what it does is it actually allows the registered owner of a vehicle to be cited if their vehicle goes through the stop signal of a school bus. And the ordinance is written in such a way that if you receive one of these citations, you have the opportunity to present the driver, if it wasn't you, to take responsibility for the violation. It's an ordinance that we haven't been able to enforce in many years because of the charter, but also because of the rules of minor procedure. So the current rules of minor procedure, the rules we have to follow for the actual charging documents, require that a moving violation citation be handed to the defendant in person by a police officer. So in order to do a red light enforcement program with cameras, you would have to you'd have to change the charter, and then you would also have to create a new civil ordinance to cover that kind of behavior. And you could model that after the school bus ordinance.
So it's not just the observation, but it's the actual services of the citation.
Thank you, Mr. Bill.
Yeah, there's outfit buses with city buses and school buses and with cameras as well. People do that, get that kind of thing. But
And that is something the assembly might consider as a starting point.
the one intersection that's particularly bad in our neck of the woods is Forest Park Drive, because you've got downhill to both of them. And if you've got snow or ice on the ground, people are more inclined to speed up through it and take that risk than try to stop and slide through. And I'm sure that's not the only intersection with a kind of design that could cause a problem. But that's why one intersection where people in Turnigan, for example, are upset about it, and would be, I believe, mostly supportive of this stuff.
Thank you. Just one last statement. What we're going to do is come up with an amendment. We'd like you to draft it first, Mr. Pauls, dealing with what Ms. Gray Jackson said. The other one is I would like amendment, or to what Mr. Flynn said. I want to keep this local, because I don't want it outsourced to some mega company or 48. Yes, sir.
So I guess also, but you're saying even if this passed, we'd still have to change something in the current code, correct?
So if the voters approve the amendment to the charter, that still wouldn't alter the court rules. The court rules of line of procedure. So you couldn't do it as a moving violation as we currently write under Title
The
IX.
administration.
You'd have to do it as a civil violation. There's a administrative code.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're saying here.
Well, what I'm looking at is doing much like the things controlling ordinance, putting a committee together to work on this, work with our traffic engineer, work with law enforcement and legal, to make sure we got a good document to go forward. But the first step is for us to send this to voters, let this up to them. We can hit action from there. I will tell you, in the Ford radar data, it was interesting. We had people come in and say, that wasn't me. And so we would show a photo to them of the driver, and it was them. Nobody we gave a ticket to under photo radar, it wasn't them. They would admit, oh yeah, that was me. Your face on there didn't lie. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I just, for whatever it's worth, since you're doing amendments, and I don't know if there's anything that would fit with this, one of the concerns I do have about this in doing it in this manner is simply that, we're asking the voters to make this change to allow us to do this, but they're not, this could result in having a third-party vendor. Well, I guess it might be taken away with the local amendment.
Right, I think his will take that out.
Okay.
It's not mine yet.
Well, good idea.
We're going to draft it.
We want to give them credit anyway.
And I think that would significantly help some of my concerns, but I think that we're kind of making the voters buy a pig in a poke to a certain extent, because they don't know, and then we're going to have process afterwards. But once they set this down, they don't get to vote again on the way it turns out. Just that would be my concern. We had it actually laid out in
If the voters do
advance.
approve this, we will have testimony as it comes forward to the Assembly. This is just the beginning, getting through the door. Because right now, we can't even do this. I am not comfortable spending taxpayers' dollars. This is a public city before you can't do it. You first got to go permission, even look into it. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm wondering if the camera vendor is going to sell us the cameras if they don't get a chance to make some money on reviewing the film.
Cellular.
I mean, that's part of their business model, right? So I'm just throwing that out there.
I believe that the administration, once we draft the document, go forward with it. Because there's 101 different companies out there in this day and age, and somebody can save the technology.
All right.
Mr. Dunbar?
Could I direct that question to Stephanie? Maybe you have a better sense of this. I mean, if we restrict it, or police officers as well, if we restrict it to just municipal employees and don't allow these third-party vendors, is that going to make it effectively dead letter? I mean, does that make it so we can't implement this?
To be honest, I don't know. Most of these systems have been implemented using a vendor that usually fronts the money for cameras, and part of the deal is that they get a portion of the profits associated with this. Whether or not, with technology being advanced as what it is, as far as whether or not there's a camera available with enough resolution to be able to identify, but then the whole timing issue of knowing what the signal timing is, connecting into the system to know where the vehicle's location, all that, I don't know whether that is available for purchase for us to implement. That would be our preference, to keep it under municipal control, because we don't like people messing with our signals.
So I can add that most of these systems, it's several pictures. One is of the red light and so on, and the vehicle in proximity to the red light, where it is in the intersection. And another one focuses on the license plates, and quite often it'll be front and rear, so they capture the best pictures. And they usually provide those photographs with. But most of these are done by companies where they own the equipment, they run the program, and they take about 70% of the revenue that comes from it. So for municipalities or cities that go into it as creating and generating revenue, it just doesn't occur. In reality, it doesn't happen. But that's not the intent of this. The intent of this would be to correct
But if you do that amendment.
bad behavior.
Right. We can go some of that. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, I just want to, to the extent I think that's an important issue, is that all of the, once this came up, all of the information I received was about cities that operate in that manner. They have the vendors come in, they install the cameras, doesn't cost the city anything. All the photos are actually sent to the vendor, who then contacts the city somehow on issues that they get, and they get like 70%, and the city gets 30%. If we are going to go to local control, put an amendment that says that they would basically make that an unreality, I would like to know if there are actually examples out there of actual cities that do what we're talking about doing locally controlled, so that we're not changing the charter on something that is not even going to be possible. So is there a possibility of getting that information pretty quick?
Stephanie, are you on a network that allows you to ask that question out there of other traffic engineers?
Not in this time frame. Yeah, I'd say not between now and Tuesday, no.
Mr. Wilson?
But just, I think, a responsibility, just because we have an outside vendor doesn't mean we could set the parameters. You know, this is what we consider a violation, and ultimately it will be verified by someone with a municipality, maybe an officer. So you don't really, it's just like we have all our SAP computers are going to be somewhere in lower 48, we don't know where, but it's still our program.
These deals, 70% of the money goes to these vendors for the violations. And that's fine, and that's the system we want, but I just think it was inconsistent with some of the discussions.
Because of where the fine goes.
Yeah, how the system operates, but mostly about fine, and it's basically their system, and we just get a piece of it and they run it. So we should get 51%.
Ms. LeBlanc and then Mr. Dunbar.
A couple of years ago when I was on vacation, I met a constable from a small city in British Columbia, Canada, and they had a photo radar program in his city, and he was actually the photo red light system. He was the photo red light officer for the department. And it was a private vendor that owned and operated the system, but they actually sent the citation data to him, and it was his job in the police department to review the data, verify that it was a violation by their standards, and then issue the citation, and they issue their citations through registered mail. So that's kind of the middle ground of where they own the system, but we still have control over who gets tickets, who doesn't. Their climate's different than ours, though. I think we're going to have a lot of problems with a vendor wanting to actually put a system here, because for a good 8 months out of the year, reading license plates is really difficult. Even in a police car when you pull up on their back bumper. If I counted the number of times I told dispatch I was stopping a car with an unreadable plate, I couldn't. There's just too many. And having a visible license plate is essential to get an issue of citation.
So I don't know if they still do it. There's two jurisdictions, Baltimore as well as Washington, D.C. use this type of technology now. Some jurisdictions do it for a while and then they discontinue it. So I don't know if they still have active programs, but there's some places that you could look.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, we've got some new information here now. Maybe we need two amendments, one that sort of goes completely municipal control, one that has some kind of middle ground. I will say, if we amend it to such a way where it's either extremely uncommon or, you know, non-existent for the rest of the country that it's done in this way because third-party vendors are somehow boxed out, I actually still think it's worth asking these people of Anchorage to allow us to do this. Because, you know, we might figure out a new system in the future. I mean, if they give us in principle how to do it, I mean, maybe we'll want to put this on the bond at some point, the infrastructure to do this, you know, if we restrict it this way. Yeah, so I guess that's just what I wanted to say. Even if it makes it relatively impractical to box out vendors in some way, I think I'm still in favor of asking people of Anchorage whether conceptually they want to do this.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, sir?
Yeah, and my point was just to that, is that, you know, after all, what we really want is not revenue so much as behavior change. And so the advertising that we're doing there is or that it's a problem is going to help in and of itself in terms of changing behavior. And I think that's what we want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the comments, but I especially appreciate Mr. Dunbar's last comment because that was the intent of this ordinance from the beginning. To just ask the public, well, you know, we have a problem with red lights. Do you want us to do something that continue to involve you even after this vote has been taken? That's been the intent from day one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the opposite opinion of Mr. Ray Jackson. I have the opposite opinion of Mr. Dunbar's statement, but not surprising. My main concern is that, you know, we put this on the ballot and we're going to ask people to vote on it. And one of the things they're going to ask us, because that's been the discussion, is, well, is this going to be an outside vendor that's going to be getting, and all we're going to be able to say is, well, we don't know yet. We won't have any answers. There won't be, you know, how do you have an election where you really can't provide anything other than, we would just like the authority to do this. We'll see how it works out. I think we would have a much better chance, and I think it would be a much better process if we actually had a plan in place. I know it's kind of tough with the timing of this, but we've had this problem for several years, that actually laid out for people what there was that was projected to happen if they approved this, which I think I've said probably twice now, at least, so I won't say it again.
Ms. Gray Jackson, one last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last comment, okay? Thank you for your comments, Mr. Evans. But, you know. No, however, again, you know, this is the first step in beginning to address the problem that we have in this community. On a personal note, and I never put my personal opinion out there, I always listen to my constituents first, but I see about 5 red light runners every freaking day. And I was a rare ended. You know, I'm okay. But no. But anyway, this, I mean, there's going to be a lot that has to be worked out, even if this is approved, and that's part 2 of the process that will involve the public. And when there's a public hearing, if the public does not want to go further, then they'll let us know, and that's going to happen. But having the authority, I think, to do something is a good first step. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, there's so many questions. One of those public.
Yeah,
Mr. Flynn, sir.
that was exactly, I want Mr. George to offer him an opportunity to speak.
Let's open up the public for about 3 minutes with the comments, if you would, please. You don't have to stand up, sir. Please sit.
Yeah, it's easier for me.
Okay.
My name's Jerry George. I'm a professional engineer, worked for 40 years in highway departments. I was chief engineering and operations for DOT for 36 years. I serve on the state commission for highway safety. Please pass this. Let's do something. I want to motivate you here. We went from 53 traffic fatalities to 86 traffic fatalities. Why the big increase? I look at the statistics almost daily. The trend started when the legislature and the municipality cut back on police enforcement of traffic safety. The Traffic Bureau for Alaska State Police went away. What happened when the Traffic Bureau, when the state troopers went away? Death rate increased dramatically. The city and the state both have budget crises, and I would not want to be in your shoes. You've got to balance, do we spend money on red light running? Do we, decrease the traffic deaths, or do we put the police out there dealing with murders? Where do we put our priority? I can tell you right now, you've killed more people on the highways than have been murdered. A dead person is still a dead person. How do you balance that? I don't envy you your job, but it's a job that needs to be done, and we can't ignore it. Please do something. I bill out at $265 an hour as an expert witness, and I'm willing to donate my time to the municipality to help work on this. Okay? If I can be of any help, if you want a citizens committee to backstop you on some of these issues, I'm willing to work on it. Nancy Reeder, police department, when she ran the traffic thing, we had a lot less desks, but we had an emphasis on traffic that we don't have today because of priorities in dealing with crime. I'd like to see us support the police department with technology rather than officers. It's a lot cheaper and it works. So, if you have any questions for me?
Questions from the members? Thank you for being here, sir. We need your phone number when you're done.
That'll right here.
I want it.
Nobody knows how to get a hold of me.
Anybody wish to testify? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Well, there are several important issues involved here. The ordinance reads it will not have significant economic effect. If your concern is only for public safety and not revenue enhancement, there are other ways to do this. A, put up dummy cameras. B, have a police car with a dummy, with a police cap sitting in it at some of these more common intersections. C, send out a mere letter to people that says, bad boy, our traffic camera saw you run a red light. If you do it again, your name is going to go on our website as a repeated scofflaw, and do some social coercion that way. It's possible that people don't have long enough memories about how things unfolded back in 1996, 97. So I was an integral part of that, so I will summarize for you how it's going to play out this time again. Because as we know, those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it. We had people who put on gas masks. We had people who put on Halloween masks. We had people who deliberately muddied up their license plate and sprinted through red lights, going, dare I, double dare you, just try and cite me. We had the court system clogged with people kept challenging their traffic photo radar citations. Finally, ultimately, 3 pro se litigants went to court over this, and the magistrates thought it was sufficiently important that they heard the issue en banc. And their ruling, and I quote, radar results are not admissible without independent corroboration from a sworn and trained police officer. And they acquitted the defendants. They, at the time, back in 1996, the city found after examining this that the cameras themselves are so expensive and so difficult and time-consuming to maintain and calibrate again and again and again, that it was simply not economically feasible to buy the cameras and train the personnel. It was much more doable to simply hire one of the outside companies who, as people have correctly said, then demanded 70% of the revenue. What people haven't talked about is that the contract also called for a quota system, a minimum number of tickets. And if they didn't meet the quota, the city was out money to make up the difference. And ultimately, when the city appealed the magistrate's ruling, en banc ruling, and lost the appeal. So this has already been adjudicated in a magistrate at the level and then at the appeals court level. So there's a reason why the citizens voted the charter change the way they did. In the least interaction with police officers, all sorts of procedural safeguards and civil and constitutional rights apply. And that is why the court rules call for personal service of a citation, so that we have those procedural safeguards to fall back on. What we haven't discussed here is the insurmountable Sixth Amendment violation. We have the right to confront our accusers, and that is the issue, one of the issues that the petitioners raised before the magistrates, and the magistrates basically agreed without saying so directly. The Sixth Amendment gives us the right to confront our accusers. What are you going to do? Put the machine on the stand? This is an insurmountable issue. There are other ways to accomplish the goal of public safety, as I've explained. So ultimately, the city had rescinded its contract with the American Traffic Systems Company, and incurred and the traffic system kind of knew, their traffic system sort of knew the Alaska mentality. So they wrote into their contract an enormous cancellation penalty. Does anybody remember what the city got dinged for? I think it was $750,000. So do you folks want to be responsible for having history play out the same way again? Because it will be challenged, it will be ruled as a constitutional violation, and the contract will be broken, and whoever is foolish enough to sign a contract with the municipality is not going to settle for a mere $750,000 when the contract is broken. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dunbar.
So I guess some interesting points on that. So if it's a Sixth Amendment issue, that'd be the federal constitution, but we've heard it's been done in other cities. There must be some way around that. On the, otherwise Chicago wouldn't be able to do this. The cameras in 1996, I totally believe that they were way too expensive, but I have a better camera on my phone now than the cameras that they had in 1996. So I assume the technology has gone forward. But the point that she raised that I really do like is the quota system. And so, perhaps we're thinking about the vendors versus and maybe we amend them out. But perhaps it makes sense to amend out the quota rather than the vendor. So if only a vendor can provide this system, I think what people found so objectionable before was the quota-based profit motive, right? And that drive to have more and more of these violations. Not so much that it was given to you by this person versus this person, is that they felt there was profit motive that intruded. And I'm wondering if there's some way that we could do an amendment to ban the quota system that would address that while still allowing us to use a private party if they are the ones that can affordably provide the technology. Sorry, Mr.
Just in response to that, I don't think, if you go by the vendor model, the quota system doesn't seem to be an issue because every video of anybody running a red light is going to have to get cited. You're not going to be able to cut it off and say, well, we've already done our 30 for this month, so anybody else we're not going to cite. It's going to be every single picture that's taken that evidences somebody running a red light will have to get issued a citation.
So why was quota an issue in 1996?
It's a minimum.
That's what I'm saying.
And that was also, there was differences in between radar and red light running too that are issues to this, but.
We have a lot more answers out there, sir.
Back when photo radar was first put into effect, the ordinance was directed to school zones. So when the contract was written, it allowed the vendor to monitor school zones during non-school times. That was the contentious part of the ordinance. The vans were out there collecting tickets during non-school hours. The problem was the contract said they could do it. And then when the city decided that they didn't want to do it that way because of the public feedback, that's when you had a contract issue. It wasn't a quota. It was when they could do it and when they couldn't do it.
The way it was originally designed, it was only when school was in session that you were supposed to be able to give these. The Mice administration changed that. They did it on their own. They made it 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It drove people crazy. We could understand during school because we didn't want kids hitting intersections, crosswalks. But that's the reason that somebody's got to get involved in this because we saw what happened to Mice administration.
So how did the quota system play into that? There wasn't a quota?
That was for minimum profit by the vendor. So if you didn't hit a certain number of citations, they didn't make a minimal profit to make it worth their while.
Right.
That's why they wanted it all the time, not just in school. So the quota was not trying to get the numbers up. The quota was establishing a level that they could justify the expense of doing long time.
I think that we would better look at it as a performance measure in the contract and not necessarily a quota. Quotas, people refer to ours having a ticket quota, which we don't. So it'd be more like a performance measure where the vendor was entitled to make a certain amount of money, and if they didn't, then the city's on the hook to give them an extra money. I don't think that a comparison between the red light enforcement system and the photo radar is actually as clear cut as it may sound initially. They're two completely different technologies. I've actually read the case decisions of the panel of 3 magistrates that found the 3 defendants not guilty. And part of their ruling was based on the manner in which we utilize radar enforcement in Alaska, which is an officer makes a personal observation of somebody's speed, makes an estimate, a visual estimate of their speed, and then only activates the radar device to actually confirm those observations. So it was contrary to the way the magistrates have been ruling on citations forever. And what the magistrates found in the ruling was the testimony that was provided concerning the operation of the equipment was by the vendor. So they were by the stakeholders in the company whose profit was based on whether or not these tickets were upheld. And the magistrates found that they were not credible witnesses. So the city failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. If we had a red light system that merely prevented photographic evidence of a violation, and we had an employee of the police department review that evidence, it would be the employee of the police department reviewing the evidence, making the charging decision, and then presenting the evidence in court. It would need to be a civil violation, so the standard of proof would be lower. But also, we would be the plaintiffs, and it would be solely on us. There's some logistical issues to take in mind, though. We have 300 signals. Which ones do you pick? How many do you pick? We have several intersections in Anchorage which have traffic volumes of over 50,000 cars per day. If 1% of those people run a red light, just over a 3-day weekend, a 3-day holiday weekend, we could come into work and have 5,000 red light citations if somebody has to go through the evidence in order to issue the appropriate charges. Who decides which ones are more important?
Hopefully,
An office.
you're trying to do the carnage that goes on out there. I get emails all the time from people in the intersections, red light records, so if there's some way to modify that behavior.
Change your email address.
So, Mr. Trainee, I thought Mr. Falsey had something.
Sorry, Mr.
I
Fall.
was just going to add on to what Juan said. Rather than viewing it as a quota system, we can view it completely the opposite, which is that the municipality is going to pay the vendor some amount of money to operate this program, that the municipality's payment will be reduced to the extent that the vendor is collecting ticket revenue, and at some point they will collect so much ticket revenue that their municipality is not going to pay them anything.
Just
real quick, what's the effect if I just do the one, Bill, I've been thinking about your point, and so if I change C to say, to modify the in-person restriction, but don't modify A, which is the regularly sworn officer, then haven't I created a system where a sworn officer doesn't have to do it in person, but it has to be a sworn officer system?
I think you may have run a huddle with Officer LeBlanc and maybe Seneca, but I think that gets you where you want.
Because I do think that was more the heart of it. There was a general minority irritation with it, but there was a majority who thought a profit motive in criminal enforcement was just wrong. And I think that's my recollection is that's what pushed it over the edge.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. This work session's over. Thanks for